Hello, I'm Alistair McIntyre. As you know, I run the website Elected Scotland, and this is a short video because I wanted to talk a little bit about the history of Scotland, but also the reporting and discussion about the current Indie Ref and referendums and so forth going on in the media. So without further ado, it's just that this week I put up a report on the teaching of Scottish history in our education system. My essential reason for doing that is that in that report it was actually saying that it's clear that Scotland was probably one of the very few countries in this world that didn't teach our children about the history of their own country. And I would tend to agree with that because I know I went to boarding school at Dollar Academy in Dollar, Clackmannanshire, Scotland for some 7 years. And while we did actually have a history, this was in the 60s by the way, while we did have a history class, and usually I was first in history when I took it, but later, because I was going towards an accounting career, or so I thought, I decided that I needed to drop history to take economics. So I was disappointed doing that in some respects because I loved history. But I can't remember getting much in the way of Scottish history in that history class. And so while I loved history, I came away from school not knowing much at all about Scottish history. And so it was many years later when I got to the point where I was looking at creating a website as a full-time occupation. I was trying to decide what I might do for a website. And because I had this passionate interest in learning more about Scottish history, which I'd never at that time had enough time to follow up personally after I left school, I thought, well, this would be a great time to do that. And as I learn, I can post what I learn up on the website. So over time, hopefully, I will be able to produce a really good resource for people wanting to know about the history of our country and the history of our people, both at home and abroad. And as I say, I always didn't do it because I figured I couldn't make enough money out of 5 million people in Scotland, of which only a small percentage would probably be online. And so I thought, nah, while I'd love to do it, it's not a financial goer. But then at that time I also happened to read an article, I think it was in the Daily Telegraph as it happened, and they were saying that while there's only 5 million people in Scotland, there's going to be about something like 50 million people of Scots descent around the world. And I thought, yeah, of course, that's my market. So from 5 million to 55 million, that means there's a decent target audience to aim my website at. Because after all, I was brought up overseas, Iran, Kuwait, Malta, I was in Paris for 6 months. So I mean, I had fairly extensive experience about living overseas because also my father was in the oil company and so forth. So that's why I was out there, and that's why I was sent to boarding school because I was in Kuwait at the time, and they couldn't educate you plus past the 11 plus exams, as it were then. So there's no option but for me to go somewhere to boarding school to continue my education. And this, my father said, best education in the world is in Scotland, that's where you're going to go. A lot of my friends were going to Switzerland, so I was a bit unhappy because I'd much rather go to Switzerland than I would have gone to Scotland. But at 11 or 10 and a half, I think it was at that time, I didn't get the choice, so off to Scotland I went. But anyway, the thing is, as I started to learn about the history of Scotland, I learned so much that I'm just fascinated with. I mean, for example, just the Scots diaspora. I think most of it had heard of the Highland clearances. I'd also heard of clans, but because I was in the central belt of Scotland and had no real connection up the Highlands, I really wasn't particularly aware even of Highland clans, to be honest. And I wasn't really particularly aware of Scottish families either, like from the borders and stuff like that. And I had no real knowledge of Scots-Irish or the Ulster Scots or anything of that. I mean, I had no real awareness of any of those things. So as I started to learn more about the Highlands and also the Central Belt and places in Scotland, I just started to think, wow, you know, there's just so much I know nothing about. So the first book I actually ever put up on the site was actually a 6-volume. It was the history of the Highlands, the Highland clans and the Highland Regiments. And it came in 6 volumes, and I bought it from Jamestown in Edinburgh. And basically, because in those early days there was no internet archive, I had to actually physically buy the books, and I had to literally type in the books onto the web pages. Although not too long after, we got some basic OCRing software came out, so I was able to do some optical character recognition scanning of the pages, which greatly accelerated getting information up on the site. But certainly for the first several years, I was totally reliant on going through second-hand bookshops and antiquarian bookshops looking for relevant books that I thought would be of interest. So out of this first 6 volume set, I learned a huge amount about the Highlands of Scotland and its history. I also learned a huge amount about the Scottish regiments, and I also learned a huge amount about the Scottish clans. So that was a great basis on which to go, but then I wanted to go further, and the next set I got was the 3-volume set of the Domestic Annals of Scotland, from around the 1500s to the middle of 1700s, that period it covered. And it was by putting that on that I came to this point where it said, and the women of Scotland are concerned that 20,000 of our young people are going to fight for Germany. And I thought, fight for Germany? I've never heard about this. All I knew was we had the 2 world wars. We fought against Germany. So I thought, I've got to try and find something about this. So I went to, I think one of my favourite antiquarian bookshops was actually in Stirling, just down from Stirling University. And I was fortunate enough in that I found a book called Scots in Germany. So I bought it, rushed home, put it all up on the website, but was amazed, I'm totally amazed at how the Scots were involved with Germany way back then. But not only that, all the other people, Scots that had gone to Germany, and also in many respects made Germany their new home as well. Because that's why the women were so concerned, because not only were they concerned that their young people would die over there, but they might like it better than Scotland and settle and not come back to Scotland. In fact, there's not a lot of information about how many people came back to Scotland from these various massive campaigns that went on. And when you read about the Scots in Sweden, how so many thousands of Scots fought under Gustavus Adolphus there, the Swedish king, all over Europe, I mean, that was just amazing as well. So clearly our military life was huge and far bigger than I'd ever recognised. And that just opened my eyes to wanting to know more about where the Scots went and what they got up to. And that was like a whole new part of my life, was wanting to know what the Scots got up to all over the world. So, learning all that, I also put up I think it was initially 5 volumes. It was basically biographies of significant Scots. It was a collection of 5 volumes, in which case a 6th volume was later added, and I got all these 6 up on the site under our famous Scots section. But by reading a lot of these biographies, I was gobsmacked at what individual Scots had achieved in the world. And so, it was having seen what we did, I was comparing it to what we were like today, and my today was in the 1990s, as it happens, in Scotland, when I was developing the website. And I had been talking, because I saw this, to me, the web was like the Klondike gold rush. There was huge possibilities for Scotland. And I thought at this early stage, because I had actually got an edge, because I had the reputation of running Almac BBS, which is the precursor, bulletin boards were a precursor to the web and the internet. And it was the fourth largest such system basically in the world. Huge. But because the way the web was going, it clearly was showing that the BBSs had had its day. But the concept behind them were still vital and good on the web. And the concept of the web was that it would be a learning resource, a sharing resource. And unfortunately, to my mind, we've moved on to social media, which I think is only a fair comparison to really good informative websites. Because on a website you can read a whole book. You can't do that in front page, and certainly can't do it in Twitter. And so I'm thinking to myself, we should try to find a way of going back to websites, but incorporating some social media within them. And I think, to me, that's a better way forward for the future, especially for people that really want to learn a product or historic information or anything. I mean, out of it, you can now embed a lot of stuff, like from YouTube. If there's a YouTube video about something you're discussing in a history book, then maybe there's a video about it which you can include within the pages. So there's good cooperation between social media. But Facebook, I feel, isn't giving you that same means of pulling things together as a research resource. So I'm kind of aware that because websites themselves perhaps are on decline because social media is on the increase, I think we're going the wrong way if you want to learn about information and really study topics in some depth. I mean, I've lost count the number of times I've gone to Google to search for something, and quite literally I'm going through pages and pages and pages of the results to try to find what I'm looking for. But all they're saying is, these are the most popular ones for your search term. This is what we recommend. But unfortunately, often the popular stuff isn't what I'm looking for. It's hard, good, solid facts. And oftentimes they'll connect you to Wikipedia, but in all honesty, Wikipedia doesn't often give you these really good facts you're looking for, in depth. And so you keep looking, and maybe 30 pages down your links, you eventually will find a site that, yes, this is the kind of information I'm actually looking for. So I think in some ways we need a new search service that will concentrate on quality of content and not popularity. And I think that's badly needed, and that's one thing I would call for. It's surely someone like Microsoft with a Bing could stop trying to copy Google and actually go their own route and look for quality of content and not the popular sites. Because the popular sites, on the whole, never give you that quality of content. Anyway, following this up, I noticed that, because I'm obviously not only recognizing that history is a very minor part of everyone's life, but those that get interested in the history of a place, love to delve deep, to really learn, like my ancestors came from this place in Scotland. What was that place like? And there's no better way to understand what that place was like and how people might have lived by getting a history of that place. As you come to Leftwich Scotland, you'll get the history of that place and what it was like, and hopefully little insights into how the people lived and stuff of that nature. And that way you can translate all onto your ancestor, and therefore get a kind of view of how they were thinking when they came to America or Canada or Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, wherever, or even England for that matter. But I think what I'm seeing today is that we're having these discussions about whether Scotland should be independent, whether we should have a referendum, whether Britain should leave the EU and all of this kind of stuff. But I think in some respects you need to know the history of what happened to make us what we are today and where we might go in the future. Now, I've just put up a history book about a guy called John Major. This is the guy that was born and brought up in Scotland, but ended up spending many years teaching in Paris, in France, being a lecturer there, and also lecturer at Glasgow and St Andrews University. I mean, he was a leading person of his time. This was back in the 16th century, which is 1546, something like that. And in it, he's actually calling for a union of the crowns. And of course, Union of the Crowns was 1707, so this is well a century and a half, perhaps, before we actually got Union of the Crowns. But he said at the time, the people were saying, yes, but if we got like a Great Britain, then he said Scotland's name would be out of it. But he said, but England's name wouldn't be there either. It would be Great Britain, all of us together. And he said, we've got our royal family could join together and be one royal family for the whole of Great Britain. And he felt this was a great way forward. Now, again, if you read the histories, on the site you can learn the histories of why the crowns joined and how we joined to become Great Britain. I mean, all of that's on the site, so you can learn about it. But you should also remember that, again, you might not know, because I know not many people study history in any great depth, but we had the Darien scheme, and this is because basically Scotland wasn't allowed into ports basically in America and over in Asia and China and these, because they were considered to be English possessions, as it were, and so Scottish shipping and merchants weren't allowed in these areas. So we thought we'd counter that by opening up Darien, which was in central South America, and the idea was to become a great trading port. And of course, a lot of the landed people and wealthy people in Scotland put tons of money into the project, which ended up being a total disaster. And as a result, Scotland basically went bankrupt. But it was interesting to note that maybe a couple of years later, England actually put a lot of money into Scotland to semi-compensate them for all the money they'd lost in Darien. And it was to restart the Scottish economy again. So we can thank England, you might say, for that. And because we then joined together, Scottish merchants were then allowed in to all these places they couldn't get to before. And we made a huge success of it. I mean, we became an extremely wealthy country because we had access to all these ports. And we actually led the settlement of these countries for the British Empire. And if you actually look about how the Scots and English have got on since, principally we've got on very well indeed. In fact, some 800,000 Scots of the current generation live and work in England. And they're having kids who are now born in England. In fact, one of the figures that's very hard to find is some estimate on how many people of Scots descent are now considered to be English. Because there are many people in the Scots diaspora that are now considered to be Americans and Canadians and Africans and all kinds of things. But their original descendants were from Scotland. And when you read about the significant Scots, as I say, they went all over the world. And I mean, a lot of them went into England, but tons of them went all over the world. Out in Asia, Hong Kong was almost led by Scottish merchants out there. But, you know, we converted to Christianity. You know, I mean, we were big in Christianity. I mean, there are words that say the North American continent was basically Presbyterian simply because of the Scots that came over. The Scots missionaries and churchmen just came over in droves. They ran some of the finest universities in North America. So, I mean, what we've achieved has just been absolutely amazing. But I've got to say most Scots don't know any of that. But then, so when I start to look at today, I think if you read the history sites like on Elected Scotland, you will find information about those, why we broke up and why we got together, and why people were, I mean, like Burns said, a parcel of rogues in the nation, you know, because he was against this joining up. But nevertheless, you know, you'll get papers tell you why it was good and why it was bad. You can then make up your own mind of whether it was good or bad. I mean, bearing in mind, I worked for 6 years, lived and worked in England for 6 years. I had a wonderful time. I loved the place. If I hadn't been made redundant and my parents' health hadn't suffered pretty badly at that time, I would probably still be down there. I would never come back to Scotland. But, you know, that's life. Things change. So what I'm seeing today is this discussion. And I say that unfortunately the press isn't really of much help, because they're all biased on the whole. I mean, we've heard about the recent bias with the BBC, because they're against Brexit and want us to remain. So most of their editorial is anti-Brexit. And there's been official complaints to them about the bias that they have in their reporting, which I agree with, I have to say. But that's the trouble. You can't actually believe the press anymore, because they're all biased, one skib or another. I don't know of anyone that's particularly even-handed on it. But if you really are against Brexit, then basically what you're saying is, I want to be in the EU. But have you done any studies as to what the EU does for Scotland? Or how good the EU is? Or what it is doing for all the European countries? I mean, what you probably are not aware, because you can't, I mean, that's the trouble. Normally you just read something and say, we should be in the EU. But if you don't read any reasoned arguments about why we shouldn't be in the EU, then you're ignoring the other half of the argument. If you know both sides, you can then make a reasoned decision as to what ones you want to believe in. Now, I mean, I used to be a great supporter of us being in the EU. Now, I am totally against us being in the EU. And that's simply because I've read so much about what goes on. I also make sure I read the international stories on the EU countries. And what I'm seeing is a lot of disquiet amongst all the EU countries about being a member of the EU. There are growing percentages everywhere about people being anti-EU. So if Scotland manages to get independence and manages to join the EU, it might join the EU just as the EU is totally falling apart. And then, of course, they'll be asked the question, well, why did you want to join an organisation that's clearly gone, done? Oh, well, we didn't know all that at the time, you know. We're stupid, we know that, but we're not going to admit it. I mean, this is the problem. But as you get reasoned discussions going on in the press, what is unfortunately happening is that the SNP supporters are actually very clever people. As soon as you've got a really good article about something in one of the newspapers where they're putting a case, if you actually look at the comments, the vast majority of the comments do not address that article. They're all articles about how stupid the person is, how pathetic the person is, or the other one is say how great this person is. But no one, almost none of the comments are backing up the article. So if the article is critical about something, there's really almost no comments about why you shouldn't be critical of that person, or emphasising why that article is correct because you know of this, this, this and this. There's almost no facts anywhere. So as soon as you produce an article that's counter to something, it's like the SNP, for example. If you don't like the SNP and you're saying that in your article, you're going to get slaughtered personally. But what does that do? It doesn't actually answer the points you've raised in the article. It's just trying to get people off that focus. They're saying, if we can rubbish this guy, then we don't need to answer the questions he's putting to you in this article. So if the guy's saying the SNP is bad because they've done this, you're not saying, well, wait a minute, that's wrong because yes, they did that, but this is why they did that, and this is why it was much better than this guy's saying. You don't get comments like that. You just get someone trashing the person. And the reason they're really clever like that is it takes you off the whole topic of what the article is about. And I think that's where comments, we're going to have to start looking at comments in the press much more accurate than we do. Because if all the comments to do is to rubbish someone, because they've dared to be against your world views, and you rubbish them personally, that comment should never be allowed to put on the site. I think if a comment comes up that is addressing the issue specifically, that should be allowed whether it's good or bad. But if someone is not addressing the issues that were raised in the article, they shouldn't even be allowed to post anything. And I find this myself, because you can't help get dragged into stuff like that from time to time. Like doing a video the other day on why I think the SNP is failing Scotland. You know, I got a comment that basically was saying that because of my diabetic, I'm going to get more comas and I'm going to die pretty soon, and that's great. And that in any event, I should stay out of Scottish politics. Now, none of that addressed any of the issues I brought up in my video. So, you can only come to one of two conclusions. One, the person that wrote that was extremely intelligent and was trying to deflect my comments so that people would minimize anything that I'd said. Or two, they were very ignorant and stupid and pathetic individuals that they have to actually address those issues to me personally, which I think is rude in the extreme, and clearly the person has not been brought up well at all, and frankly should be better off dead rather than alive, because they're contributing nothing. The scum of the earth is what I call these kind of people. So that's one of two. They're either the scum of the earth, and they shouldn't be allowed to ever post anything anywhere in their lives because they're totally stupid and ignorant. Or two, they're extremely clever and intelligent because they're diverting you off the main topic of what you were putting the video up about. And that's what I'm beginning to think. Because basically, I don't know if comments are changing anything. And until we get rid of the volume and stick to the quality, then I don't think comments on these newspaper sites are actually going to do us any good at all. I mean, you go to the Scotsman, I get 5 pages of comments. I don't have the time to read 5 pages of comments. I really don't. And so I think moderation should be much greater and much tighter. If you've something to say, you should be allowed to say it, but it needs to be factual, it needs to address the article that was actually posted. What did that article say? What was it trying to say? And so if you're adding a comment, you should be addressing what was done in that video or the article that was written. You should be addressing the points in it, either making a case for why it's wrong or complimenting because it's right, because you've got other information which supports what you're saying. That would make the commentary far better and far more likely to be read on a regular basis, because then you've got a basis for proper discussion. So, and certainly I think the third thing I might say is that I would actually like more people to get involved, because unfortunately the silent majority isn't really helping anyone. I mean, clearly the polling is way out, and I'm sure it's because people are sick of it up at pollsters and just saying, yeah, and they're giving them a lot of garbage when they call. And I think that's why, let's be honest, the last 3 big elections as far as we're concerned, one was the general election in the UK, and no one predicted that the Conservatives would have an overall majority at the end of it. No one did, and yet they did. Shock, horror, amazement. Then the next big one was on Brexit, and of course from President Obama, almost every senior politician and business leader that said it was disastrous for Britain to vote for Brexit. Lo and behold, we voted for Brexit. Shock, horror, how could this happen? None of the polling suggested this. And then we had the Donald Trump presidential election in America. No one thought Donald Trump had a hope in hell of becoming the Republican nominee. And even then, when he became it, they said it was obviously a disaster. And no one predicted that he was going to be elected president, yet he was. So I think the media, I mean, I'll be honest with you, there's a lot of old media journalists and anchors around the place that frankly should be sacked, because clearly they have got it all wrong, and therefore they're not moving with the times. People are now getting people are getting more of their news from non-news sources now, because the journalists and the editors that are in those are so old-fashioned that they've had their day and it's time for them to just go. And let's get a whole new breed of media people in. Because I tell you, I think the media should be held much more to account. I think they're the ones causing so much dissent in the world. And I think it's time a lot of them were closed down or totally changed. We need to get whole new thinking in. And the trouble is, where do you get them? Because education in Scotland is so bad now that we're not producing the kind of people we need that will chase up proper stories and give unbiased reports. We don't have the intelligence anymore. And I think that's a real problem, a real danger. I mean, if you look at the history for education in Scotland, it was a time when every kid had to have education. It was a rule of law. And Scotland brought it in first. And they actually had some very good teachers back in those days as well that knew how to teach. And so even people from disadvantaged families could end up becoming leaders of worlds. I mean, try looking at the Scots diaspora and some of what they've achieved in the world, which has been remarkable. But look at where they came from. That's where biographies are so brilliant. Well, this was the Scots. They say, how did he start that? How did he get to that point? Read the biography. It's on my website. Read how they did it and how they achieved it. You'll be totally amazed and gobsmacked. And then compare it to today. Today we're a pale comparison of what we used to be. And we need to deal with that. And so I think it's one of the things we can deal with is to create your own blogs. I mean, for example, I go to the Choco blog on a regular basis because I've done my own research from my own resources and official resources and information sources. I have discovered that the Choco blog gives me the most up-to-date and best information on the finances of Scotland that I know of anywhere. And he explains it so well. So I now can say I totally trust the Choco blog to give me the facts about financing in Scotland. I've found other ones that I like, but the Choco blog is probably the only one I would cite to anyone, because there's so many people out there who are now quizzing the JERS reports, and in actual fact they're very accurate, but there's so many of them that are trying to poo-poo them and trying to say, oh, they're all wrong. But you know, these are official Scottish government statistics created by the civil service. At the end of the day, they're as accurate as you're going to get. And so I can point you to a site where you can go and listen on the Choco blog, where he's got a whole post about JERS deniers. And he knocks down all the stupid comments beautifully with factual information that you can verify yourself, because he gives the sources of the information. He doesn't just say things, he'll give you sources of why what he's saying is right and tells you where to go to find them. And then he justifies, well, are they good sources? And he'll tell you why they're good sources. So, you know, I think so what I'm trying to say is that history can give you a great context for why we're in the EU, why we're Great Britain rather than Scotland and England. All of that you can learn from the website. And all I'm adding to that is that let's question the media, because I think we've got to find media that fixes a lot of the issues. As I say, comments are now either just plain stupid, or they are trying to put their own agenda by blocking common sense articles. I mean, if you get attacked enough, you get to the point where you're saying, I don't want to get attacked anymore, I'm just going to stop posting. That's a victory for them. We can't allow them that victory. We can't allow anyone to stop free speech. But free speech isn't free to insult someone. Free speech is there to put your facts together. And so that's what I'd ask. Get involved, but let's get involved properly. If you don't understand something, why don't you put a comment saying, I don't really understand the background to this. Could someone tell me somewhere I can go for further information? You know, and hopefully someone will give you a place you can go and read other more relevant posts that will give you that information. But don't just sit back and be lazy. Like so many Scots, unfortunately, too many of our Scots are stupid. And that's because of bad education. But too many are lazy. You might complain about something, but to do anything about it, I can't be bothered. But that's not going to cut it. If we want a great country, we really have to get involved and try and do something. So, that's what I'd ask. Get involved. Ignore all these stupid personal posts that just rubbish other people, because they do nothing to change the agenda. Nothing at all. And let's see if we can't get better quality comments from our news media. And remember, the news media are probably more of the cause of problems than anyone else. Instead of our politicians, I call them the news media as probably one of the major problems that we have in the world today because of their misreporting. Okay, so anyway, there's my kind of views. But as I say, I hope you will learn more about the background by coming to my website and reading about these big contentious issues in history to understand why we're where we are today. And then read the news that I put up in the Scottish News Feed to keep abreast of changes and happenings that are going on. And yes, be aware, I am biased now against the SNP. I am certainly biased for Brexit. And I'm certainly biased because I think we're better in Great Britain than we are independent. So these are my biases. I'm very honest and open about it, whereas most people aren't, but I'm open and honest about it. But I try also to report from the other side because I'm aware that I used to support the EU. I no longer don't, because by doing extensive reading, I've come to the point of view that I don't think we're better in the EU. I think certainly we're better in Great Britain than we are in the EU for sure. And I say I have changed my mind over time because of reading and researching and discussing it with people. So my mind's been changed over the years. If you're fixated on something, I don't think that's healthy. I think you should always be open to argument. But as I say, do use my site to get the background to these big decisions that we made in history that have got us to this point. As I said, read my Scott News Feed because I'll keep you up to date with happenings that are going on within that affect Scotland in the bigger European situation, the world situation. And feel free to use any page in my site that comments on something. You can add your own comment to it. No problem with that at all. Just please try to be factual. If you're just an insulting comment, it won't even be allowed onto the site, because I'm taking the high ground, whereas most of the media aren't. If you're adding a comment that really has nothing to do with the content of the article, it won't be allowed onto the site. That I can guarantee. You don't need to agree with the article for a comment to be accepted, that's for sure. But it has to be a reasoned argument. If it is, it'll get posted. Okay, so there you go. There's some of my thoughts and some of the things you might consider doing and how you might get involved in taking all this forward. Cheers, thanks for listening.